Good afternoon again, fiction lovers. Let's finish up our discussion of the reading. Take us from page 112 through page 127 then. I want to introduce a new rhetorical figure to you because it's just really started to make an appearance here, and it's come up half a dozen times or so in just the next 15 pages. It's called zeugma. It's spelled Z-E-U-G-M-A. And so zeugma is generally, rhetorically, where one part of speech governs another. Okay, where one part of speech governs another. And so I'm going to give you some examples of it here. This is a description of Millicent Bruton, Lady Bruton. Power was hers, position, income. So you can see here that the subject, of course, is power, and the verb is was. But then notice, position and income, reflexively, were hers also. Okay? So it allows the reader then to perform the logical insertion of the parts of speech that are explicitly left out. Okay? Here's a good example of what's called diazeugma. She had had good friends, known the ablest men of her day. So in diazeugma, it means that the subject has been, it's referenced in the first case, but then it's left off. Okay? And you can see this happening in situations where, like here, this is an indirect characterization move on the part of Woolf. It's as though the, let's say the identity then of Lady Bruton has been subverted to men, okay, and her friends and so forth. So despite the fact that she gives off this sort of imperious air about her, there is also a sense of diminishment because she's a woman in a male society. She can't fully express herself or live into to who she could possibly be. You'll recall earlier in the reading, Richard Dalloway says that she could have been the head of the dragoons, and he would have gladly served under her in a military capacity. And so, I suppose we're supposed to feel something like sympathy for Lady Bruton because she was just born the wrong sex in a time where women were not valued for their leadership ability, especially not with respect to endeavors in more manly kind of endeavors. Okay, so here we have a nice example of polyptoton, held and holding. And I'm going to really try to gloss quick through here because I don't want to keep you guys too long. So let me see if I can autofocus here. Okay. Nice example of I'd spoken in our class lesson today about the appearance of acoustic devices, and so here's just a nice the speed of the morning traffic slackened and single cars rattled carelessly down half-empty streets. So you have both the assonance here of the short A, and then of course here you have the onomatopoeia. This video is brought to you by the Staedtler Noris HB-2, a really nice little pencil. This is the most popular pencil in Europe. And yes, I've regressed. I've gone back to the wood pencil. So sue me. Now this right here is an absolutely phenomenal example of elaborative diacope, and so you can bet your sweet bippy this is going to show up on the quiz tomorrow. So look at this. Haymakers. Well, let's go back to Richard Dalloway. In Norfolk, of which Richard Dalloway was half thinking, a soft, warm wind blew. Look at that. Look at that music. Soft, warm wind blew back. The petals confused the waters. We have the echo of the W from before. Ruffled the flowering grasses. Haymakers, who had pitched beneath hedges to sleep away the morning toil, parted curtains of green blades, moved trembling globes of cow parsley to see the sky, the blue, the steadfast, the blazing summer sky. That is just a marvelous combination of a whole array of things. Not only is it an example of zeugma, but here we have the sky, the blue, the steadfast, the blazing summer sky. So you got the tricolon here with the blue, the steadfast, the blazing. It's just really nice. Okay, let's see. I'm going to keep rolling, and we'll note a couple. We'll gloss a couple of things here. With So Richard goes into this shop with Hugh Whitbread, and you have this sort of protracted scene where Hugh is such a pompous ass, and he is wanting to see Mr. Dubonnet, okay? And he says this like, oh, I know people, but he's hiding the fact that he has no idea what his wife is really, like what her tastes are, what her measurements are, any of this sort of thing. So he is going to mask this ignorance about some detail about his wife and lord it over this shop clerk that, he's not going to deal with anybody except Mr. Dubonnet. Okay, because, Dubonnet knows all this stuff. He can't even tell this clerk any of the details about something that he wants to wear or buy for his wife. Okay, so this is a nice little detail about Dalloway, who is watching Hugh buy this stuff, he wants to buy stuff, and how he just doesn't buy stuff for Clarissa, because he never gave Clarissa presents except a bracelet 2 or 3 years ago, which had not been a success. She never wore it. It pained him to remember that she never wore it. Let me just say that is kind of a, you get married, you have a girlfriend, whatever, a significant other, and you try to do something nice, and you think you know them, and you get them something, it's like they never wear it. It's really a bummer. Poor Richard. Okay, so here is Hugh, unspeakably pompous. That's a marvelous characterization, and of course, hyperbole, to be unspeakably pompous. So let's see here. For Dubonnet, it seemed, was out, and Hugh would not buy anything until Mr. Dubonnet chose to be in, at which the youth flushed and bowed his correct little bow. So the polyptoton here, it was all perfectly correct. So again, we go back reflexively to the first use. So the polyptoton, the effect of it here is to accentuate how Hugh Whitbread's rudeness is demeaning the clerk. Okay, so might very well ask you a question about that. Okay, so glossing, rolling up here. So here's the whole business with Richard in the shop. So instead of buying Clarissa something from the jewelry shop, he's going to buy flowers. Okay. Now, this feeling about her when they spoke of Peter Walsh at luncheon, and they never spoke of it, not for years had they spoken of it, which he thought, grasping his red and white roses together, a vast bunch and tissue paper, is the greatest mistake in the world. Hyperbole, the polyptoton here highlights the taboo subject between the two of them. Okay, Peter Walsh. All right? And now, so look here. The time comes when it can't be said. One's too shy to say it. That is, I love you, he thought, pocketing his sixpence or two of change, setting off with his great bunch held against his body to Westminster to say straight out, in so many words, this is the first time he says this, whatever she might think of him, holding out his flowers, I love you. Okay? And he's just not, look what he does. Here he was walking across London to say to Clarissa in so many words that he loved her. Okay? I mean, it's just hilarious. Nice isocolon here. Partly one's lazy, partly one's shy. And we're going to keep rolling down through this portion. I got to move my camera. Sorry. Let's see. So And this is, here he is in this reflective mood, about talking about thinking about his life, thinking about his wife, and so forth. And where he says, being perceived in his simplicity, yet at the same time grown rather speechless, rather stiff, he repeated that it was a miracle that he should have married Clarissa. A miracle. His life had been a miracle. So this is an example of extended diacope. Okay, might ask you a question about that. He thought, hesitating to cross. You see how many times there's people are crossing roads and so forth. If you've ever been in a big city, you know kind of what an adventure that can be. Okay, so here again, fourth time, for he would say it in so many words when he came into the room, and yet now he can't even say it in his own head. Because it is 1,000 pities never to say what one feels, he thought, crossing the green park and observing with pleasure how in the shade of the trees whole family. He's like, this whole long sentence just shows you how far away he is from the idea of expressing himself emotionally. So, because look, to say what one feels, he thought. And note the contrast here to Peter Walsh. Peter Walsh, who wears his heart on his sleeve. Okay? Euphemistically speaking, who is the emotional guy. So here's Clarissa torn between two men, emotionally. One who expresses himself too much, one who expresses himself far too little. And if she could have had a hybrid of the two guys, she'd have been, perfectly happy woman. Here's a nice example of paradox here. Bearing his flowers like a weapon. Of course, it's a simile as well. But the idea that you would bear flowers like a weapon. Here he's again. But he would tell Clarissa that he loved her in so many words. He had, once upon a time, been jealous of Peter Walsh. Really? Jealous of him and Clarissa. And here's a really great simile. But she had often said to him that she had been right not to marry Peter Walsh, which, knowing Clarissa, was obviously true. She wanted support. Not that she was weak, but she wanted support. Wanted here means both lacked and desired. And so, as for Buckingham Palace, like an old prima donna facing the audience, all in white, you can't deny it a certain dignity he considered, nor despise what does, after all, stand to millions of people. So here, if you're going to unpack the simile, it's Buckingham Palace is the tenor, and then he's personifying Buckingham Palace. Then the vehicle is an old prima donna facing the audience, all in white. And so the ground here, the basis for the comparison, is a once magnificent, beautiful woman that has faded in attractiveness and importance. Okay, a once magnificent, beautiful, in this case, woman, who has faded in attractiveness and importance. Okay, so here we are, middle of page 117, and Big Ben beginning to strike. First the warning, right? Da, 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 da. We all know how that goes. Musical, then the hour, irrevocable. And again, Woolf gives us the sound of the bell, and then it's back here on the next page where she actually tells us what time it is. So I wanted to point out another figure to you. Happiness is this, he thought. So what would be normal syntax? The normal syntax would be, this is happiness. As he's thinking about that he's walking to his house. Here he was in the prime of life, walking to his house in Westminster to tell Clarissa that he loved her. Happiness is this, he thought. It's a marvelous style move on the part of Woolf, because in the inversion of the syntax, okay, which is formally called anastrophe, anastrophe, it is a figure of disorder. It's used to highlight how unusual it is for Richard to consider explicitly these simple things. Okay? Alrighty. Really awesome extended metaphor here at the top of page 118. And the sound of the bell flooded the room with its melancholy wave, which receded and gathered itself together to fall once more when she heard distractingly something fumbling, something scratching at the door. This is also, by the way, a good example of synesthesia. Probably going to ask you that as a question. So remember, synesthesia is an image that in its description takes on the characteristics of another image type. So here you're talking about the auditory sound of the bell, which is taking on the tactility of water, of a wave. Okay? Nice example of elaborative diacope here. He was holding out flowers, roses, red and white roses. Yep. But he could not bring himself to say he loved her, not in so many words. And I used to have a note in the margin that said, "Men suck," which, I mean, basically, when you think about it, like he's built himself up to tell her he loves her. I mean, which seems like such a simple thing, right? You can't do it. You can't do it. And yet, she knows him so well that the gesture of him giving her the flowers, she reads that as, "I love you." Okay? So, when you think about the how well do relationships work or marriages or whatever. So here's a case where I'm sure that, Clarissa would like to hear the words, but Richard can't do it. And she knows he can't do it. And so it's like, okay, they understand each other. Let's see. Here's a nice example of epimony. But how lovely, she said, taking his flowers. She understood. She understood without his speaking, his Clarissa. Had Lady Bruton asked after her? That you've got this nice exchange between the two of them, the implied dialogue. Peter Walsh was back. This is Richard telling her. So this is an example of a brief dramatic irony, because we're all aware that she knows it. I mean, he came up to the room and, bawled like a baby right there by the window. Okay, let's see. So description of old Hugh Whitbread, a nice elaborative diacope. But this is it's a form of it. It's an inversion. He was getting absolutely intolerable, buying Evelyn necklaces, fatter than ever, an intolerable ass. Okay, let's see. Once again, but he could not tell her he loved her. He held her hand. Happiness is this, he thought. Remember, anastrophe. Let's see. Now, how about this? Clarissa has told him that that Miss Kilman is in the house, right? And she says so. Kilman arrives just as we've done lunch, she said. Elizabeth turns pink. They shut themselves up. I suppose they're praying. Lord, he didn't like it. But these things pass over if you let them. There is so much packed into that. Okay. Lord, first of all, okay, so the atheist is evoking the name of the, of the deity. Then these things pass over. I mean, we can't miss the, the Jewish reference there, Passover. If you let them. So the irony here is that he sees Christianity as a fad. It's just so great. Okay. He had not said, "I love you," but he held her hand. Happiness is this, he thought. So this is going to be, in one way, it's elaborative diacope, but it's also going to be epimony because of the repetition of is this, okay? He's trying to convince himself. All right, let's see. Nice exchange here with, it's the implied dialogue. If she worried about these parties, he would not let her give them. This is Richard thinking. Did she wish she had married Peter? This is her thinking as he's, maybe saying this to her. But he must go. And this is Richard speaking again. So you've got that nice insertion of her thought while he's talking to her. So this is a perfect example. I mean, a great example of how stream of consciousness works and what it is that that Woolf is doing here. Okay? All right. So my note here at the bottom is there were the roses, and this is, Clarissa has come to expect or understand that this is all he's capable of communicating is just the gift. Okay. So let's see. I've already talked to you about zeugma. Here's another example of it. And there is dignity. There's a dignity in people, a solitude. Here that the way that this is how Clarissa feels most alive. It's when she is surrounded by these people, because in her intimate relationships with her husband, with her daughter, even with her friends, there's this sort of arm's lengthness to the whole thing. Do you remember in The Great Gatsby when Jordan Baker tells Nick that she likes big parties because they are so intimate? And it's the paradoxical idea that in a large setting, no one's going to notice a couple of people sitting around having a private conversation. Whereas in a small dinner party, I mean, if you've got 8 people in the room and 2 people sequester themselves from, or cut themselves off from everybody else to have a conversation, it's super noticeable. So it's this same sort of idea that she feels most intimately connected with people en masse when there's a lot of them around. Okay? A nice example of epimony here, characterizing Peter Walsh. Peter always in love with the wrong woman. You might say that's maybe a good example of antanaclasis. Remember where the words change slightly? Antanaclasis. Okay. All right. So here's a nice example of, I just introduced you to the whole thing with zeugma. This is called diazeugma. All right, so this is a specific type. So here the subject governs several verbs. So she, and this is we're talking about Clarissa. She muddled Armenians and Turks, loved success, hated discomfort, must be liked, talked oceans of nonsense, and to this day, ask her what the equator was, and she did not know. So here the effect of the diazeugma is that, notice the she, the Clarissa, disappears. It's like her sense of self diminishes, and parties are her way of distinguishing herself, of being someone in the world. Okay, very sad. Let's see. Let's talk about this. So we're pushing down here in the second page to talk about Miss Kilman, because we know that Miss Kilman and Elizabeth are in the house praying, presumably, and so we're going to get this information about Miss Kilman, who Clarissa is jealous of because she has an emotional attachment to her daughter, and she's suspicious of it, but can't very well step in and do anything about it necessarily. And it's built on religion, which Clarissa has no interest in. Okay? So here in this long description of Miss Kilman, she is reflecting upon herself. She had been cheated. Yes, the word was no exaggeration, for surely a girl has a right to some kind of happiness. And she had never been happy, what with being so clumsy and so poor. And then, just as she might have had a chance at Miss Dolby's school, the war came, and she had never been able to tell lies. Miss Dolby thought she would be happier with people who shared her views about the Germans. She had to go. So she explains like why she got booted out of school. So the polyptyton that Woolf uses here is to accentuate this important issue, okay? That because of her name, she is not she's not happy. Spelt the name Kielman in the 18th century, but her brother had been killed. They turned her out because she would not pretend that the Germans were all villains, that she had German friends when the only happy days of her life had been spent in Germany. Okay? So nice example of how she's used that, again, to accentuate a key idea. And here's a good example of what's called antithesis. Now, she did not envy women like Clarissa Dalloway. She pitied them. Okay? All right, here's another example of the diazeugma that we've talked about before. She had heard the Reverend Edward Whittaker preach, the boys sing, had seen the solemn lights descend, and whether it was the music or the voices. Okay? So, again, the subject governs the rest of the sentence. Here's a nice example of synecdoche. But the sound was excruciating. She had no ear. In other words, no appreciation for music. Okay, the hot and turbulent feelings which boiled and surged in her had been assuaged as she sat there, and she had wept copiously and gone to call on Mr. Whittaker at his private house in Kensington. So this is where she's thinking of something like the conversion moment where the spiritual world enters her life. Okay, let's see. I'm going to gloss. Do I need to gloss? Yeah, I'm almost done. Okay. In fact, I'm pretty sure this is the end of the reading. Okay, so there as we end the reading, it's just struck 3:30. So here we are, end of our reading, 3:30, and I will see you, metaphorically speaking, tomorrow for the quiz.